Let's get started. Kaya Wanju. My name is Matthias Liffers. I'm Product Manager of RAID at the Australian Research Data Commons, and I'll be your chair for this session. Welcome to the third in a webinar series about navigating the new NHMRC and MRFF Open Science Policy. This third session is devoted to persistent identifiers and matter close to my heart. I'll be introducing the panelists later. So next slide, please. I would like to acknowledge that I'm in Borroloo, Perth, Whadjuk Noongar country, Whadjuk Noongar Budja. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present who have kept the language and culture of the Whadjuk Noongar people alive for literally tens of thousands of years. And I also would like to acknowledge any First Nations people in this call and pass my respects to you. Next slide, please. So this session is being recorded and the recording will be uploaded to YouTube. It is a webinar, so you will not be recorded, as it were. There's no risk of that necessarily, but feel free to use your Zoom reactions and chat with each other in the chat. Now, we do ask that you ask your questions in the Q&A module. It'll be much easier for us to manage them. Next slide, please. So by participating in this webinar, we do ask that you do abide by the ARDC Code of Conduct, and we have a link there in the chat available for you to have a look at that. We want this to be an open, sharing, and kind environment for learning together. Next slide, please. Okay, so objectives for today for this webinar on persistent identifiers in the NHMRC MRFF Open Science Policy. First and foremost, we'd all love to understand what persistent identifiers are and what their role is in supporting open science. We'll be exploring how PID adoption supports compliance with the NHMRC MRFF Open Science Policy, and we'll also be identifying practical best practice approaches and actions for implementing PIDs across research workflows and infrastructure. Thank you. Next slide, please. So introducing our panel today, I've already said that, I'm Matthias Lippers, but we are joined today by first my colleague Siobhann McCafferty, who is the Product Manager for Persistent Identifiers at the Australian Research Data Commons. We also have Dr. Julie Glover, who is an Executive Director at the National Health and Medical Research Council, and her colleague Kate LeMay, who is the Assistant Director for Research Policy and Evaluation Research Foundations Branch at the NHMRC. And our last speaker will be Melroy Almeida, who is the Portfolio Manager of PIDs at the Australian Access Federation. And we also have Cindy Tumrin from the MRFF on hand to answer any questions that might be directly related to the MRFF. So let's get on with our first presentation, which is being delivered by Siobhann McCafferty, Product Manager for Persistent Identifiers, the ARDC. Siobhann has a background in humanities, arts and social sciences academia and working in information management in a variety of areas. At the ARDC, she is a product manager in my team, a persistent identifier enthusiast, and a facility of communities of practice in these areas. Siobhann will be introducing us to persistent identifiers. Over to you, Siobhann.
Thanks very much, Matthias. Much appreciated. And hello, folks coming from Meanjin, Brisbane today, and excited to talk to you all. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking to you about persistent identifiers for research. I'll be taking us through what a persistent identifier is, PID benefits, the national strategy, 5 priority PID areas, the 2026 focus areas and resources. Next slide, please. So if you get lost, just refer to this lovely slide. Next slide, please. So what are persistent identifiers? Well, it's kind of all in the name, really. So they have 3 main attributes. They're persistent. They're intended to be around, if not forever, for a very long time. Secondly, they're unique. you can use the same name to identify two different people or things, and one person can have more than one name. But a PID is a unique identifier. It's used for one person or thing, even if they have lots of different names, or if those names change or get abbreviated. The third quality is that they have open metadata. The majority of them have open metadata. And the metadata provides information about the person or thing it refers to. Openness enables anything or anyone to have, use, and share their PIDs for everyone's benefit. Next slide, please. And this phrase, I think, is a great way to talk about persistent identifiers, stolen from my colleague Matthias. A persistent identifier is a globally unique, long-lasting reference to an entity with a human and machine-readable metadata that can contain qualified relationships to other entities underpinned by open standards, governance, and infrastructure. They are unique, persistent alphanumeric codes that positively identify entities. They're connected to registries of information about those entities, and they enable robust linking to and between those entities, establishing provenance and attribution as specified in the FAIR principles, which we talk a little bit more about. PIDs enable us to leverage the power of emerging technologies to manage and interpret large volumes of data as they are machine readable, which is particularly relevant in these emerging AI days. Next slide, please. So this linking of PIDs drives research, innovation, and impact, and provides the evidence base to optimize the research and innovation ecosystem. They contribute to improved research quality by improving research reproducibility, provenance, and attribution, and reducing duplication. They contribute by catalyzing innovation and impact by linking and making accessible research inputs and outputs across sectors, disciplines, and borders. They contribute by increasing efficiency of the research and innovation ecosystem, reducing administrative burden through data reuse, and by optimizing the ecosystem through better understanding the relationship between the elements of that ecosystem, including between investment, use, output, outcomes, and impact. So a PID allows you to make those qualified references. And this is one of those most important features of PIDs, as it asserts links between funding and projects, samples and data, authors and their papers. And you can see that slightly more technical view in this diagram. So this is a network of links, which we often refer to as the PID graph or research graph, showing how those connections are made, what kind of connections they are, and what the entities within the ecosystem are. Next slide, please. PIDs also support the creation and consumption of fair and care standard data. So the ARDC and the wider research community ask for research assets to be easily accessible as possible, because accessible research inputs and outputs drive research impact, quality, translation, and innovation, which is great for research. We recognise that translating the FAIR principles into practice will vary for each discipline. And we are involved in conversations across those disciplines about just how we do this. In the context of the rise of the FAIR principles in the community of international data infrastructure builders, the Global Indigenous Data Alliance also formulated the CARE principles to address a clear deficit in FAIR regarding Indigenous people's rights and interests. Next slide, please. So I've looked at what PIDs are and some of the underlying policy and strategy. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the Australian context. So we know what a PID is, we know what the business case is, but how do we actually do that? So in Australia, we have developed the ARDC National PID Strategy. And the key drivers are listed on the slide: to make research inputs and outputs fair, to better identify, track, and cite research outputs, to enable national scale research analytics, to foster research industry innovation, and to enhance research impact. Next slide, please. And we've got three kind of pillars doing that. The first is strategic alignment. Sorry, my headphones just died. Strategic alignment. The second is national capacity and capability uplift. And the third is underpinning service delivery. Next slide, please. We also commissioned a cost-benefit report with More Brains Consulting and a benchmarking activity led by Digital Science. So we could have a really solid understanding with referable documentation around just why PIDs are a great idea and benchmarking to see where we're at now and where we're going. Next slide, please. From that strategy work, we come to a more practical, pragmatic area of advice around PIDs, and we developed a collection of PID principles for stakeholders and identified 5 priority PIDs. So these principles are to create rich metadata when minting PIDs, integrate PIDs into research and research management workflows, use PIDs early in research workflows and apply to any appropriate entity, to use internationally recognized leading practice for PID minting and management. Where possible, manage PIDs well at the institutional level by, number 6, establishing an institutional PID policy or ensuring relevant policies reference PIDs, and creating a stakeholder action plan outlining the goals and implementation plans for the adoption and use of PIDs and contributing the plan to the National PIDs Roadmap. And last of all, to choose systems that offer PID creation integrations and ongoing management. So you'll notice in those principles that they are focused on organisations and institutions. They are intended to take the burden of research administration off the individual researcher and for it to be automated and added to systems wherever possible to try and make the business of research flow better. I always call myself a research plumber. So we're looking at this as creating a PIDs plumbing map that helps everything flow better. And those PIDs that we would encourage people to use are ORCID for identifying researchers and contributors to research, RAW for research organisations and facilities, DOIs for identifying research grants, data, publications, instruments, and other types of research outputs in scope, RAID for identifying research projects and activities, and IGSN for identifying research physical samples. There are, of course, other PIDs, particularly at discipline level. We don't intend these to replace them. Where necessary, we would say these are a standardized addition that will help things to be cross-disciplinary, cross-national, cross-system. But we don't in any way say you should stop using your discipline standards for identification as well. Next page, please. So we've developed a policy and strategy around this. We have advice around how and what to do, but just who we would like to do this work. As mentioned, we're talking about institutions, facilities, and bodies like funders. So for the 2026 strategy, we are focusing on these 3 areas. In INCRIS facilities, we've got a particular focus on instrument and organisation PIDs and microscopy as well. The work on funders is what brings us here today, though. So you're going to learn more about how this PID strategy intersects with the work that's happening at NHMRC, MRFF, and the guidelines that come out of that. Next page, please. Before I finish, this is a list of resources. Everything I've mentioned should be in there, including some extra fun things. And I'll draw your attention to the best practices for instruments and for identifiers for research organisations and facilities, because they only came out last week, which is very exciting. So if you want to learn more about the National PID strategy, please have a look at these. And if you have any questions, please ask me after. Next slide. At this email address. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Siobhann. Now I've got too many windows open, and I do know we have some questions already, but we will, I believe, be waiting until after the panelists have finished speaking before holding an open Q&A session. So I encourage you to add your questions to the Q&A module at any time, and we will either answer them directly in the webinar or I'm sure there'll be some mechanism for sharing answers afterwards as well. Once again, thank you, Siobhann. And then our next speaker, I've already introduced Dr. Julie Glover, but let's go into a little more detail. She manages NHMRC's largest research funding schemes, coordinates peer review training activities, manages NHMRC's grants and funding arrangements with research institutions, and leads NHMRC's evaluation and impact strategies. That's an awful lot of things there, Julie, but over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm here on, hi everyone, I'm here on Ngunnawal country. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are attending today. As Matthias introduced, I look after the Research Foundations branch. We have a small team within that branch, and Kate is in that team, and she'll talk about her role shortly. But I just wanted to really acknowledge the huge amount of work this team has done in this open science space, but as well as in the PID space. I really just want to, oh, next slide, please. Oh, no, it's all right. You've already jumped to the next slide. Sorry, back one. I really just wanted to share a little bit about my personal journey with PIDs. And so Siobhann has done a great introduction to how the National PID strategy was developed. I was one of the, was invited to be one of the people on the steering group for that project. I came to the project with a very, very low knowledge of PIDs, a very strong passion for data and improving our data quality, but I didn't know a lot about PIDs. So I just really wanted to thank a lot of the people who are on this call, and I know my Australian research colleagues are also listening in today. That's been an amazing project because it's really helped to line us up, lift our capability and line us up, and you'll see that ARC and NHMRC are very aligned on the PID strategy. And then, of course, we've got this open science policy that we've developed in collaboration with the Medical Research Future Fund. So people, the experts on this panel are very much experts and very keen to understand how we can help you in this journey. And always, my experience over the last few years, very, very happy to give any sort of presentations or training that is needed. So we really want to hear from you today about where your perspectives are and help us to transmit the vision on PIDs, because I feel like that you're already interested in this because you've self-selected to come to the webinar. But I feel like there's a whole there's a lot we can do to promote it to our colleagues who are probably not as aware of the benefits or the vision. Next slide, please. So I guess just following on from the fact that we've got a national PID strategy, what does that mean? Like, what happens in each of the organisations? And I just wanted to show some examples here of how NHMRC has tried to permeate the PID strategy amongst our other strategies and other strategies that we're involved in. So PIDs are mentioned in our corporate plan, last year's corporate plan, and going forward as well as integrated into our information and data strategy. We be contributed and helped lead the development of the National Health and Medical Research Strategy. And as well, PIDs are instrumental to the open science policy, which Kate will talk more about. The other thing I just wanted to take the chance to mention here is earlier this week, we released a statement on consumer and community involvement in health and medical research, which was developed with the Consumer Health Forum, and really emphasising the importance of involving consumers and community in all stages of research. That NHMRC is sending a very strong signal. That's what quality research looks like to us. There's a lot of toolkits and guidance available with that statement, but I just wanted to flag it in this context, is that how PIDs can really help us, and open science can help us with one of the values in that statement, which is about transparency and accountability. Next slide, please. And perhaps it's self-evident, but I can't be emphasized enough, is why are we doing this? The goals we have are to make the inputs, outputs, outcomes, and collaborations able to be found where we've contributed funding and able to be linked to researchers and the institutions and verified. So really increasing the availability, the findability, and the verification of data. Next slide, please. More importantly, I think but why are we doing this? It's so that we can aim to decrease the administrative burden across the sector. We want to increase the quality of science, which comes back to some of the things that I talked about previously. We really want to understand and promote the value of investment in research and what are the impacts that investment brings. We want to track engagement, translation. And this is all, if we do this in a coordinated way with other research funders and with research organisations across Australia and internationally, we can better understand and improve the research and innovation ecosystem, which is our ultimate goal. Next slide, please. I feel I use this slide a lot, which I think is one of Natasha's slides from the ARDC, but it just shows so well the power that we have if we can align and move in the same direction. So Australia has quite a good uptake, or very good uptake actually, of ORCID and some of the other PIDs. So we're in such a good position to make the most of this if we can align and move forward. Thanks very much. And I think over to next slide and over to Kate.
So Kate, of course, you are the Assistant Director in the Research Policy and Evaluation section at the National Health and Medical Research Council. And in that role, Kate serves as the open science subject matter expert and leads the development and coordination of cross-cutting research policies, including responsible research assessment.
I'll be giving a brief overview of NHMRC and MRFF's joint open science policy and focus on its requirements for PIDs. So the policy applies to all research funded wholly or partly by NHMRC and or MRFF during or after the funding period, and all grant recipients must comply. Researchers are expected to implement open science practices across the research cycle for all outputs, including papers, data, software, and code, consistent with the UNESCO recommendation on open science. It also complements existing NHMRC and MRFF guidance, including ethics, integrity, consumer involvement, and animal use, which researchers must also follow. Next slide, please. These are just a few of the requirements and recommendations in the policy. At least one version of any research paper must be openly accessible with a CC BY license from the moment it's published, with clear recognition of the funding sources. Researchers are also expected to take reasonable steps to share research data and metadata using an open as possible, as closed as necessary approach in alignment with the care and fair principles. For research outputs involving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities, researchers must take actions that consider ownership, management, use of, access to, and distribution of research results and outputs, and recognise and protect Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. Administering organisations are strongly encouraged to have an open science policy and recognise open science in recruitment and promotion. NHMRC is progressing recognition and rewarding of open science practices through our action plan for responsible research assessment. The policy encourages researchers to plan for openness from the start of projects, to publish negative results as well as positive ones, to pre-register research involving pre-planned hypothesis testing, to make research software and code available for others to use and build upon, and to use appropriate open licenses for all research outputs. Open engagement of societal actors is encouraged through extended collaboration between scientists and societal actors beyond the scientific community. Next slide, please. As this webinar is focused on PIDs, here are the specific mentions of PIDs in the policy. There are mandatory requirements for funder acknowledgement to include the grant identification number, and for NHMRC specifically to also include the NHMRC RAW. This could be through actions such as including them in the acknowledgements and/or ensuring that metadata include them. We expect that all researchers funded by NHMRC and/or MRFF will have or obtain an ORCID and provide it to us. For all newly awarded NHMRC grants, Chief Investigator A's must have a valid ORCID recorded in their Sapphire profile to be eligible to hold NHMRC-funded grants. In order to make the awarding process as smooth as possible, we recommend CIAs check if they have an ORCID recorded in their profile. For grants that have final reports, research outputs must be provided in that report using appropriate PIDs. It's recommended that appropriate metadata, including PIDs, accompany all research outputs. The policy strongly encourages the use of PIDs and specifically names DOIs, ORCIDs, RAIDs, and RAWs. Any reuse of research outputs should also be appropriately acknowledged and cited, with appropriate reference to any PID for that output. Next slide, please. In accordance with the National PID Strategy and Roadmap, NHMRC has developed a PIDs action plan, which we've been busy implementing. We've integrated ORCIDs and RAWs into the grant data set that we publish, introduced requirements for PIDs in the Open Science Policy, as I just outlined, and we require administering institutions to have and provide us their RAW. We're working towards writing peer review participation to ORCID records, including DOIs in the data that we will publish from final reports, and getting DOIs for significant NHMRC publications and reports. That's all for now for NHMRC. Back over to you, Matthias.
Thank you very much for that. Again, a reminder, everybody, please put your questions in the Q&A module, and we'll get an opportunity to discuss those after we've finished our formal talks. Thanks again, Julie and Kate. Now we have Melroy Almeida, who, as I said before, is the portfolio manager for PIDs at the Australian Access Federation. He's a big fan of persistent identifiers and believes in their ability to enhance research and make it fair. He also interacts with ORCID consortium members to help them with their communication and implementation strategies and to realise benefits of their ORCID consortium membership. Today he'll be discussing implementing the Open Science Policy using a real-world case study. Over to you, Melroy.
Thank you for that, Matthias. Yes, thank you. And next slide. Now, those of you all who are attending this webinar would already be familiar with ORCID, but just as a refresher, let me talk about what ORCID is again. ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. And ORCID's priority is to ensure that everyone who contributes to research or does research is uniquely identified and clearly connected to their work, irrespective of which discipline they are in, what field they belong to, what institution or country they come from, or even when they've done that particular research. The mission of ORCID is to build trust and transparency by linking you to your contributions, your affiliations, and your achievements. One of the things ORCID allows you to easily do is stay recognized and visible throughout your research career. Now, next slide, please. AEF, on the other hand, leads the Australian ORCID Consortium, but AEF's vision is to see a more connected future where we can have research, industry, and government easily collaborate. And that's one of the reasons that AEF leads the Australian ORCID Consortium. By aligning with ORCID's vision to connect researchers to their research outputs and activities, what AEF is trying to do is try and further streamline and strengthen those collaborations and connections among our researcher communities. Next slide, please, Matthias. Now, the Australian ORCID Consortium is about 43 members in 2026. It was 44 members last year. Having said that, we did have University of Adelaide and University of South Australia merge into Adelaide University, hence the reason for 43 members. Apart from 37 universities, we do have 3 research organizations, which are CSIRO, the Australian Nuclear Science Technology Organization, and ARDC. Then we also have ARC and NHMRC as our funders who are part of the consortium. and then Queensland Health as the government organization that's also part of the consortium. Next slide, please, Matthias. Beautiful. So this is the timeline of the Australian ORCID consortium, and in 2014 there was a vision that the Australian National Data Service, which is one of the precursor organizations to ARDC, along with the Council of Australasian University Librarians, had to address the challenge of identifying and disambiguating researchers. And what turned out from that vision was the idea of a consortium, which was then launched in 2016. So when the consortium was launched, it was launched with 40 members, and AEF was selected to be to lead the consortium. Now, if we forward over to 2018, this was when we first had our funders, ARC and NHMRC, integrate ORCID to help with their grant applications. But what is important is the fact that when our funding agencies came out and said that they would be using ORCID ID to help researchers pre-populate their grant submissions, that is when, and you'll see from next slides, that is when there was a lot of uptake with regards to ORCID. Then again, in 2020, as consortium leads, we did launch a maturity assessment survey for our consortium members. And this was around trying to understand where our members were with their integration, what they were doing well, and where we could help them try and get more out of it. In 2022, there was the PIDs cost-benefit analysis report that was released, and my colleague Siobhann's already mentioned about it. The findings from that report said that if 5 priority PIDs were implemented, it would save about $24 million a year, and that's just in efficiency savings, right? And so then in 2024, one of the milestones for the consortium was that all consortium members had an integration with ORCID. What that means is all of them were in a position to actually read or write from the ORCID registry. Now, in 2025, there was the National PID Benchmarking Report that, again, Siobhann mentioned. And what that PID benchmarking report actually talks about is how Australia is punching well above its weight in terms of the completeness of ORCID record, not just within Asia, but internationally, worldwide itself. And so the next slide, please, Matthias. Beautiful. So this is a quick overview of the statistics, and these are unique ORCID records updated per year. So what that means is a unique ORCID record is if you have an ORCID record, and if that ORCID record was, say, updated by your institution, and then it was updated by a publisher, it will just be counted as one in that calendar year. So as you can see, in 2016, there weren't many unique ORCID records being updated. However, in 2018, it has almost doubled. Now, if you look between 2018 and 2019, that number has massively increased. And that is, again, because of the intervention of our funding agencies, where they came out and said, look, we are going to be integrating ORCID with our systems. And all of a sudden, you've got integrations that are reading from ORCID registries, writing to ORCID registries. And what that means is now you're having a better quality of information in those ORCID records sitting there. Let's move over to 2024. That's when the cost-benefit analysis report came out. That came out in 2022. So from towards the end of 2022, when the report was released, and all of 2023 as consortium leads, along with our partners at ARDC, we did a lot of communication, outreach, and engagement to talk to members about integrating their ORCID. And we can see that result in 2024, where again, the number of ORCID records that have been updated has again increased much more than over preceding years. And into 2025, when there was a lot of work around the national PID strategy and roadmap, you can see that more ORCID records are further being updated every year. What is even better is we've not even reached halfway in 2026, and the number of ORCID records updated has almost reached the level of what it was for all of 2025. So all of this looks really good. But what does this mean for you? What does it mean for open science policy? Matthias, next slide, please. So ORCID, having your ORCID record actually being updated by integrations, what that means is it improves transparency and integrity. And it does that by allowing for better tracking of research outcomes and by enabling what is called trust markers. So that is the validation of affiliation information or publications by trusted organizations like the universities or publishers, that sort of thing. What they do is having these trust markers means that the level of assurance is increased, as well as reliability of scholarly information is also increased. Next is enhanced discoverability, and that actually helps support fair metrics and fair principles. And it does that because if your ORCID records are up to date, what they do is they act as a hub for scholarly activities. It improves the ability of peers, funders, publishers to find and track and cite researchers' work, thus complying with open data and transparency requirements. Furthermore, by reducing name ambiguity, ORCID ensures that there is accurate attribution and recognition happening in that researchers can receive proper credit for all their work, including less recognized outputs like your data sets or software across the entire career. Then the widespread use of ORCID also facilitates open exchange of information between different systems like your publishers, funders, and university systems. And lastly, but definitely not the least, what ORCID does is it massively helps reduce the administrative burden, because if you can automatically synchronize your ORCID record with publishing systems, your institutional repositories, it reduces manual data entries, allowing researchers to spend more time doing what they do, that is research, and less time on administrative reporting. And with that, the next slide, please, Matthias, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Melroy. And I should actually note for the record that I'm not driving the slides. I can only do one thing at a time. We have Amani behind the scenes who is making sure this webinar runs smoothly.
Sorry about that.
So last up, we just have some concrete actions that anybody in this webinar can, sorry, not quite yet, some concrete actions that everybody in this webinar can move forward with to start their journey or start their open science journey. And this will be the last bit of talking before we get straight into the Q&A. I see we've got some great questions already, and some questions have been answered by typing, but we'll get a chance to talk about them too. So, first and foremost, researchers. Next slide, please, Amani. The most important thing, or the lowest barrier, the lowest hanging fruit is if you don't already have one, get an ORCID. And if you're a CIA, make sure it's in your Sapphire profile. And that you can get an ORCID. Melroy, how much does an ORCID cost?
The best part is you can get it for free, as in it's a special offer. It's available at the moment for free. Just register, takes a couple of minutes to sign up, and that's it.
And I think that special offer has been running for about 13 years now, hasn't it?
More or less, yes.
Yeah, and I don't think that's going to change. Wonderful, thank you, Melroy. The next step is for researchers, whenever you publish, please ensure you acknowledge the relevant funder with, in the case of the NHMRC, the NHMRC RAW, and in the case of both the NHMRC and the MRFF, the grant identifier. So please include that in, well, in fact, every output, not just publications, in data sets, in code, in the metadata, in the text. So it's machine readable and human readable. And then finally, keep a note of the PIDs for every output because they will be required for your final reports. This could be, look, I used to be a librarian, so you could, for example, maintain an EndNote library or a BibTeX library if that's your thing, and record all of those there. Next slide, please, Amani. Actions for those of us who help researchers do their work. Please take advantage of the PID integrations available to you in the systems that you already use. It might be that you have some kind of system implemented at your organization, you haven't necessarily turned on those PID integrations. Look at what you have and see if you can quickly, I wouldn't necessarily say quickly and easily, but at no extra dollar value, whether you can turn on some integrations you might not already be using. You can absolutely help researchers in recording the PIDs for each and every output for use in final outputs. And then finally, very importantly, if you do have systems that don't have PID integrations, but you think that they should, lobby with your vendors for adding or improving PID integrations. You're the customers of the vendors, and they'll be listening to you about what you want to see in the software that you use. And then finally, next slide, please, Amani. For research infrastructure providers like the ARDC, like the AAF, we need to explore where we can integrate PIDs and take advantage of them to optimize our workflows to make the lives of our researchers easier. There's no point building our fancy research infrastructure if it's too hard to use. So we've got to save researchers time here. All right, I think that we are now into question time. Is there another slide, Amani? Yeah, there we go, question time. Amani, are you facilitating the Q&A or is that my role?
Oh, no, you can do that.
Okay, cool, thanks, Amani. Okay, so having a look through all the questions, and please do take the time to add your questions to the Q&A. We have... let's have a look here. So some questions I think this can be taken by either Julie or Kate. Does the NHMRC plan to transition from Pearls to minting DOIs for grants, aligning with the ARC's approach to provide a more robust foundation for automated research evaluation?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. It's definitely on our radar, on our list, on the PID action plan. Kate, was there anything specific we wanted to say about that?
We're working towards it.
Ooh, you heard it here first, folks. I'm very excited to hear that. So then another question for the... actually, this might be for both the NHMRC and the MRFF because it is about the open science policy. Will the open science policy be updated to make the inclusion of NHMRC RAWs and grant DOI/PIDs mandatory within research output metadata rather than just in the acknowledgements text to improve the machine readability and tracking of health research impact?
I can comment on that. At the moment, the requirement for acknowledgement is that the funding must be acknowledged, and we note that it can occur in the acknowledgement section and ideally would be in the metadata, but we are aware that not everyone is in charge, and not every researcher is in charge of the metadata that is assigned to their research outputs. So we didn't want to put in a requirement that might be not feasible for researcher to meet if there's no metadata field for acknowledging research funding. So that's why we don't have a specific mandatory requirement for it. But of course, that would be best practice and we'd love it to happen.
I think similarly here from the MRFF perspective as well, and would work together with NHMRC on this front anyway. In the case of the MRFF, we're complicated by the fact that a substantial proportion of our researchers don't sit inside traditional research sectors as well, like universities and MRIs, and so that becomes even more of a barrier. This is something we're always very conscious of.
Great. Thank you very much, Kate and Cindy. Okay, there's another run-on question. Maybe for you, Kate, or well, you know what? Sorry, I'll leave it to you guys to decide who can answer this one. If any of these changes are under consideration, when can the sector expect updates to the grant management system to support these identifiers?
Fabulous question. And I know this is something that we talked about a lot during the development of the strategy, because changes to systems are hard, they cost money, and they impact on a lot of external factors as well. So we're very keen. We know that the real benefits can be reaped once we start changing our systems to ingest the various PIDs. So definitely on the radar. I can't give timelines around that, but it is something that we're working towards.
And I
Great.
guess from our end, we obviously, the majority of our grants are delivered by the NHMRC, and so we are beneficiaries of anything that the NHMRC makes to the grant system. But we also have another grant administration hub to consider, it's a different grant management system also to work that through. Same challenges as Julie has outlined as well, but hopefully soon.
Great. Thank you, Julie and Cindy, and sorry for cutting you off there, Cindy. Okay, so another question. The current criteria to obtain funding from NHMRC rely essentially on track records, i.e. publications, how many and where. Will the NHMRC take into account adherence to FAIR principles/data and metadata sharing in their grant assessment? How many data/metadata shared will be equal to one Nature paper for NHMRC?
I'm very happy to take this, and I know Kate will have some really detailed information on this one as well. I started trying to type into the answer and then listen and then type. I'm not very good at multitasking, so sorry. I'm really excited by the question because it gives me a chance to perhaps talk about some of the work and address some things that we're really trying to change at NHMRC. So the first thing is we are really trying to shift our assessment criteria away from quantity towards quality. And so that has been a shift over a number of years in our track record scheme, the largest one of which is the investigator grants. We also have increasing emphasis on impact, which is beyond publications. So we are really trying to ensure that we take into account people's track records that are broader than just people producing publications. We're a signatory to DORA and COARA. I'll let Kate talk about DORA, but I think the most important one let Kate talk about COARA, but from a DORA perspective, it's not the journal that matters, it's the quality of the paper. And we have been training and having that conversation with our peer reviewers for many, many years. The other thing I was going to mention is that for some of our schemes, or investigator scheme and synergy scheme, and I think it was also postgrad goals, we have a top 10 publications. We're now shifting that. We've just put a consultation out for our synergy grant scheme to top 10 outputs. So a strong signal that we're intending to broaden our assessment of criteria. And postgrad goals, which is open at the moment, I think has already taken that step as well. Kate, anything you wanted to say in addition there?
Yes, as Julie mentioned, we're also signatories to the Agreement on Responsible Research Assessment and members of COARA, the Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment. And as part of that, we've developed our action plan on responsible research assessment. And one of the main pillars of that action plan is to integrate open science practices into research assessment across NHMRC grant schemes. So this is something that we're well aware of, that we want to embed more across our research assessment. In terms of how many data will equal a Nature paper, it's all of these movements are more along a quality and qualitative assessment focus rather than quantity.
Great, thank you very much, Kate. I was hoping for a simple ratio. Okay, look, look, as you were, everybody here was registering, we also gave you the opportunity to ask questions there, and I thought we could go through some of these pre-asked questions where they hadn't already necessarily been answered by the speakers directly. And the first one is about PIDs for instruments. So I'm going to look squarely at Siobhann, since this is one of your favourite things. So unfortunately, these questions are anonymous. I'm not sure who. We've been looking into PIDs for instruments. Do you have any insights on this at the national level?
Yes, I do. So PIDs for instruments is a really interesting and very base. On an international level, we've got the work being done by Panelist through RDA, who came up with the schema and a white paper around this, and have worked with folks like DataCite to line up that schema with the DataCite schema to make our lives a bit easier there. So we've got a developing standardization there around how we record and identify instruments. And on a national level, we've worked hard with that international work, but also tried to reflect some of what's been happening here in Australasia and Australia in particularly around this, because there was some very early work around identifying instruments done at the University of Queensland by the National Imaging Facility. So we've developed a best practice guide to how to and when and how to do things around instrument identification. And very basically, it's use a DOI, use the PID schema, where possible, collect all other associated PIDs in the metadata, and first of all, default to the standards of your discipline, because it's out of those disciplines that these standards come. So that's a very basic description of how we're doing that. On a national level for implementation, I work particularly with NCRES facilities, and we're very much aware that NCRES is a subset of national facilities, but they're kind of they're our colleagues. We're an NCRES facility as well. So we work with those facilities who have a lot of instrumentation that they're looking to identify for various reasons, and get them all lined up using these national versions of the international standards. So that works ongoing across NCRES. In institutions which house NCRES, there's also work happening there so that repositories can adequately house that information, reflect it, and have it be discoverable. So we're aware that there's a lot of crossover there between institutional work, national facility work, and researchers. Researchers themselves or research groups can access the DOI service through ARDC. It's a free service that we provide as part of the national membership to the ARDC. So if you or anyone you know is interested in setting up a DOI minting ability, first of all, talk to your institution, and if they don't have one, get them to talk to us, and we can help that happen. I hope that's useful and not too much information. I'll pop into the chat as well a link to the best practices, and also the best practices for facilities and organisations.
Great, thank you, Siobhann. There are actually a couple of questions here for me. So about RAID, I am the RAID product manager. So one broad question about wanting to know more about RAID and knowing how to access that and what have you. And what I'd actually like to do is invite everybody in this webinar to register for next week's RAID Global Community Meeting. So the community meeting is 3 webinars taking place around the clock, so one for each region. And the APAC webinar is taking place at midday Australian Eastern, 10 a.m. Australian Western, and it is completely free to attend. It's also coincidentally directly after the ARC Open Access Policy webinar, so you can jump from one to the other quite conveniently and bring your lunch. Now, another question, and it is about the NHMRC and RAID, but I might talk about funders' roles in RAID. So the question is it likely that the NHMRC would issue RAIDs for research projects in the future? Now, one of the principles I like to talk about with PIDs is certainly who owns them, who creates them, and who manages them. And typically my advice is who knows the most about the thing that the PID is for. And when it comes to research projects, with respect, funders know a lot about projects up until the point they issue the grant, and then they have to wait for a report to come in to then learn more about what's happened in that project. And in the meantime, lots of things happen. Data is collected, analysed, instruments are used, samples are collected. And so really the advice for RAID is that the institution hosting the research project is best placed to issue RAIDs. Now RAIDs can, if you come along to our webinar next week, you can learn about how RAIDs make references to the grant DOIs that can be issued by funders. So very much looking forward to NHMRC's work in that area. But actually I was wondering, Julie, Kate or Cindy, whether you had anything further to add about RAIDs?
No, that was a beautiful explanation. We know that most times our funding is not supporting the full cost of a project, that some, there's other contributions. So yeah, I totally agree with your comment. Thanks.
Same here for me too.
Thank you very much. Now we are at time, I believe, or very close to time. So I think now is a good time to wrap up. Look, we do have some unanswered questions. Unfortunately, there were a lot of questions asked. So we can, the speakers and I, we can make an effort to answer some of these questions and include the responses in the packet that we'll be sharing afterwards, containing all the slides and notes from this meeting. Otherwise, sorry, is there another slide, Amani? Oh, okay, yeah. I think you should, Amani, if we're going to talk about the People RDC, you might be best placed to talk about that one.
Sure. Here's just a little bit of information of People Research Data Commons. So part of ARDC is this pillar, which is People Research Data Commons, which is a national scale data infrastructure for health research and research translation. And the areas below are the focus areas that we deal with. And I will put a link in the chat if anyone wanted more information on that too.
Thank you, Amani. Next slide.
Yeah, and there's also one more slide about Digital Health Festival, which will be at next week on the 20th and the 21st of May, and we'll be at booth 1420. So if anyone's there, come pop by and say hello.
Great, thanks, Amani. Do we have a final slide? There we go. Please like and subscribe. You can find contact details for the Open Science team and MRFF there. We also have the ARDC newsletter that we heartily encourage you to subscribe to learn about PIDs and other activities with fair data and what have you in Australia. So thank you once again to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of our attendees for coming along. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.